Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to US Feedstocks in Focus, connecting supply, certification, production, and demand, where our panel will be discussing the US feedstock landscape, and in particular, a collaborative project between RSB, National Corn Growers Association, Airlines for America, and GEVO to address bottlenecks in certification with a feedstock certification workshop. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Roz. I'm the content director for the SAF North America Congress. Sustainable Aviation Futures hosts a global series of high-level SAF and aviation decarbonisation conferences, bringing together the entire value chain to network, connect, and discuss the capabilities for scaling innovative energy solutions and powering a thriving aviation industry. Over the next 60 minutes, our panel of experts will explore how US feedstock availability, traceability, and sustainability credentials are shaping SAF project development, bringing together perspectives from across the value chain to examine how feedstock producers, certifiers, fuel suppliers, and airline buyers can align around credible certification, verification, compliance, investment, and demand signals. This webinar is being hosted ahead of the SAF North America Congress, which is taking place in Houston from November 4th to 6th. Today, we'll provide a snapshot into some of the topics that are going to be covered at the event, which will also include most of our speakers today. And it's supported by the industry, including GEVO, who are with us here now. The three-day event covers over 800 senior leaders and industry experts from across the entire value chain of aviation and energy to discuss announced SAF projects and exciting offtake agreements in North America, the path to meeting the industry's ambitious targets, as well as the global SAF landscape and other innovative energy technologies. If you'd like to keep abreast of all of our upcoming events, as well as gain access to exclusive interviews and articles, be sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, SAF Spotlight. Finally, before I hand over to today's moderator, just a couple of bits of housekeeping for everybody. The session is being recorded and will be distributed to you once the webinar finishes. So if you have to go for any reason, you won't miss out, but I would recommend sticking around because there is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask any questions you have to the panel there. And they'll do their best to answer them. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to today's brilliant moderator, Matthew Fischbacher, the Director of Energy and Environment at Alpa AST. So without further ado, Matthew, sorry, over to you.
Thank you, Roz. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of those who may be joining us from Asia, I hope. Welcome to today's Sustainable Aviation Futures webinar, U.S. Feedstock in Focus. My name is Matthew Fischbacher. I'm an airline captain, first and foremost, and I serve as Director for Energy and Environment in ALPA's Air Safety Organization. If I may give a quick background on our organization, the Airline Pilot Association represents over 80,000 pilots in 43 airlines across the United States and Canada. Within ALPA, the Air Safety Organization is the largest non-government aviation safety body in the world. And within that, the Energy and Environment Group is where we focus on energy that powers flight. As pilots, we use a lot of energy, and we know energy is about prosperity, and we're some of the biggest fans that you have for SAFs. If I may now introduce the panelists, I'm joined by four panelists who together represent the full value chain. We'll be discussing the certifier, the grower, the producer, and the airlines. And I'll introduce them in that order. First, we have Ms. Amparo Arellano, Standards and Certification Director at the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, RSB. Ms. Arellano leads the Sustainability Foundation team at RSB and is responsible for the development and strengthening of RSB's certification framework. She brings over a decade of experience in sustainability certification systems, and she's joining us from Switzerland. Welcome, Ms. Arellano. Next, Mr. Sean Arians, Vice President of Sustainable Production and Value Chain Engagement at the National Corn Growers Association. Mr. Arian represents 40,000 corn farmers and the interests of more than 300,000 growers across the United States. He also is working on his private pilot license. So he sits at a pretty unique intersection on agriculture and aviation. Welcome, Mr. Arians. Then Ms. Kathy Berggren, Director of Federal Government Relations at GEVO. Ms. Berggren leads GEVO's federal policy work in Washington, and GEVO, for those who don't know, is Gevo is building one of the first large-scale alcohol-to-jet SAF plants in the United States. Before joining Gevo, Ms. Berggren spent years at the National Corn Growers Association and on Capitol Hill, which gives her a really useful vantage point across the supply chain. Welcome, Ms. Berggren. And finally, Mr. Sean Newsom, Managing Director of Environmental Affairs at Airlines for America. A4A is the trade organization for the major U.S. airlines, and Mr. Newsom leads their work on sustainable aviation fuel and other environmental issues. He joins America's Airlines for America after a long career at Boeing, where he led their SAF program. Welcome, Mr. Newsom. I'll refer to everyone by the last name if that's okay, because we have two Seans today to avoid some confusion. So our discussion today, I think it's a really interesting one. Demand for SAF is rising sharply, and missing those targets is increasingly expensive. Let's take Germany, for example. Under a national law that took effect this January, fuel supply faces a penalty of 4,700 euros per ton of biofuel SAF shortfall and 17,000 euros per ton for missing the synthetic SAF subtargets. That's roughly 3.8 to 13.6 per liters in euros, multiples of what jet fuel kerosene itself costs today. Between CORSIA, Refuel EU Aviation, and national mandates like Germany's, the demand signals is hard, durable, and expensive to ignore. But here's the catch. International demand for CORSIA eligible SAF is climbing fast, and the certified supply isn't there yet. The United States, on the other hand, has feedstock capacity at extraordinary scale. Corn, soybean, agricultural residue, and logistics, most of all, and processing infrastructure that has been built over decades. So you have rising international demand, abundant US potential, and in the middle, a certification, policy, and trust gap that has to be bridged before that supply can flow into demand. That gap is the code we are trying to crack today. And a quick word on why the panel is about US feedstocks coming back to international certification. Well, that's exactly the point. International airlines need supply they can count towards their compliance and net zero commitments. The US has the potential to be that supply at the scale the world needs. Certification is the bridge that turns US potential into the supply the global market can actually use. The good news is that the people working to crack it are at this table: RSB, National Corn Growers Association, Gevo, Airlines for America, and others have been collaborating on a US SAF feedstock certification project. And the four panelists with us today are central to that work. We're going to spend the next hour exploring what they're doing, why it matters, and what it will take to scale it. So for the first question, Ms. Arlano, I'll start with you to set the stage. Before we get into the discussion, I think it's really helpful for everyone to understand the context, who RSB is, and why a globally recognized CORSIA approved certification body is working on a project focused on US feedstock. I know you have a few slides prepared. Ms. Arlano, over to you. Could you walk us through what RSB is and what you're working on with your US partners?
Yes. Let me just put this in presenter mode so that everybody sees the slides full screen. Can you see them in the full screen now?
I can see it.
Yeah. Okay. So looking into this particular project that we are now discussing, I'll be giving you an introduction on the project that we've been collaborating on with a multitude stakeholders in the US staff sector from the RSB. As the moderator mentioned, my name is Amparo Arellano, and I'm Standards and Certifications Director with the RSB. So the project that we are now presenting today is the US staff Feedstock project that is about scaling RSB certification in the US. It's been a project that has been implemented throughout 2025 and 2026 with the ultimate objective of scaling the availability of certified feedstocks in the US, particularly agricultural feedstocks, so that there's more availability of feedstock that has been certified for sustainability, and that enabling the scaling of the SAF sector as a whole. So I'll be introducing you to the project as well as the RSB. So first, who we are in the RSB, we are the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. We are an international certification scheme that is promoting the transition to a bio-based economy. And we do this by certifying the sustainability of the biofuels industry and the wider bioeconomy. We are recognized by the European Commission for certifying compliance with the Renewable Energy Directive, or RED III, and we also have the recognition by ICAO, by the International Civil Aviation Organization, for the certification of the compliance with the CORSIA standard, which you probably know applies for the SAF sector globally. We also have the recognition by the Japanese government for certifying compliance with the Japan Feed standard, which is the standard that applies in the bioenergy sector in Japan as well. And besides that, we also have our own voluntary standard in the RSB, which is the RSB Global. We have, therefore, a presence in a wide variety of sectors, given the number of recognitions that we have on our own voluntary standard, and that includes strong presence in the sustainable aviation fuels and the certification of sustainability there. We are now expanding also to gain presence in the maritime sector, looking into heat and electricity supply chains as well, so the wider bioenergy sector. And we are now also exploring opportunities in the chemical industry, looking into bioproducts as well. In terms of our market presence as certification for sustainability, we have certificates in the EU, mainly linked to EU RED. We also have several certificate holders that are based in the US, and therefore our engagement in today's workshop. And we also have clients in Canada, in Latin America, growing in Brazil, as well as APAC and Southeast Asian markets. So that is the RSB in a nutshell. Now, looking into this project that we are discussing today, this was a project that was built with a multitude of partners in the US that are involved in the different stages of the supply chain, of the SAF supply chain. The project is mainly facilitated by Airlines for America, and we have as funding partners all the organizations that are listed on screen: Alaska Airlines, Gevo, Airbus, Boeing, Delta, as well as United Airlines. So together with these stakeholders and in collaboration also with industry associations representing the farmers' interests in the US, we have implemented a variety of activities under the framework of this project with the ultimate idea of supporting the scaling of the SAF sector through the certification of feedstock through RSB and CORSIA. So what are the main goals that we set when we launched this project in 2025? These were four main goals. The first one, looking into the promotion of dialogue and collaboration across SAF supply chains and the wider US SAF community. So bringing together feedstock producers, traders, as well as biofuel producers, airlines, and everything in between, and create a space and utilize the opportunity that RSB brings as a dialogue platform to bring stakeholders together and have a chance of discussing on what are the bottlenecks and also identifying what are the solutions that are needed and how can RSB also support. The second goal of this project was to simplify the access to ICAO CORSIA as well as RSB certification. So looking into a bit more of a technical element of how can we really support feedstock producers in getting certified so that we increase the availability of certified feedstock, and that can also support the scaling of the SAF sector as a whole. Then we also agreed as a project goal to update and develop specific regional indicators. So these are certification indicators that apply specifically in the US. So understanding what's already applicable in the US in terms of schemes, and also create streamlined indicators that can support and facilitate the access to certification for farmers. And then finally, also build capacity and make sure that the lessons learned through the project are also appropriately shared through webinars like the one that we're hosting today. So considering those project goals, we build the project around three work streams. The first one around outreach and engagement, all about events, workshops, and bilateral discussions, as well as facilitated dialogue. Then work stream 2, which is about streamlining certification, so developing these regional indicators to facilitate the access to certification. And then finally, capacity building through webinars and concept papers and other communications materials. So those were the project goals and different work streams. In 2025, we mainly focused on the engagement piece, and we hosted a significantly big event in Seattle in May in 2025. That was the kickoff of the project and bringing all the stakeholders together to identify challenges. This year in 2026, we have also continued with the efforts around stakeholder engagement, and we hosted the US SAF Feedstock Certification Workshop, which took place in San Antonio in February, on the 24th and 25th of February. And we hosted this alongside the event of Commodity Classic, which, if you don't know, it is America's largest farmer-led, farmer-focused and agricultural event. We were lucky enough to organize this workshop together with the National Corn Growers Association and the United Soybean Board, which are also now project partners from the implementation side of things. And we hosted a workshop there that was having two sets of objectives. On one hand, we wanted to set a dialogue platform and enable the discussion that brings together farmers with biofuel producers, traders, as well as airlines. So dialogue and exchanging ideas. And on the other side, also a technical element where we were presenting from the RSV Secretariat our draft certification indicators. So our proposal on how to streamline certification in the US so that is more accessible to achieve CORSIA and RSV certification for farmers and increase the availability of certified feedstock. So those two goals, which I believe we largely accomplished through the workshop. We also provided networking opportunities and a VIP trade show for participants that joined us in San Antonio. So that was the main effort throughout this year, the hosting this workshop, as well as the indicators that we developed for that. What were the workshop takeaways? We heard from many of our participants at the workshop that they feel that the US market is overregulated. So this applies for biofuel producers, but also farmers. And there's a really significant number of schemes and programs that they need to report their data towards. They were really calling for streamlining and for RSV to support this and to consider that when developing the certification indicators. And then there was an agreement that the draft indicators that we had developed were a good starting point for implementation, but that there's also a need for piloting and testing before we consider them as final. And then finally, a strong call for providing incentives to farmers to make sure that when they sell their feedstocks for the production of biofuel or SAF, that they are truly are being generated an additional value for their crops. And then finally, also supporting RSV as a dialogue platform. So those were the main takeaways of the workshop. And I think with that, we're going to go into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Orlano. Excellent presentation, and certainly dialogue is center to how we expand this new industry. So my first question will be to Mr. Newsom. You represent the buyers. U.S. airlines flying into global markets with compliance obligations across international markets and net zero commitments to make good on. This project pulls together growers, certifiers, and fuel producers, and airlines are at the table too. I'm interested in what specifically airlines see in this that they couldn't solve on their own. So the question is, to reiterate from the airline seat, why does this certification project matter, and what problems does it solve that you can't solve on your own?
Hi, Matthew, and everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to the Sustainable Aviation Futures folks. So the airlines are committed to environmental performance and reducing their carbon emissions. We've made, as an industry, broad commitments to using SAF in airline operations. It's important to note that airlines are SAF buyers, but they're not the only SAF buyers. Airlines are partnering with their own customers, their corporate customers, to make SAF purchases viable. And so the certifications of SAF, the SAF certifications, are representing a combination of buyer requirements coming from airlines and their customers. As airlines, we're not fuel producers, we're not feedstock growers, we're not SAF certification entities, and we're really not requirement setters. We're entities in the value chain, but we want SAF to be successful broadly for the industry. And in our discussions with SAF producers, with people in the agricultural community, particularly in the US, we heard concerns about the difficulty and challenges of obtaining SAF certifications. And so we reached out to RSV, seeking their support in how we might improve that environment for the SAF producers and for the growers. We're not the entities that are going to get certified, but we need the entities that are going to get certified to be able to do so efficiently and affordably so that SAF can be more successful for the industry as a whole. So we're really just trying to be facilitators or enablers, conveners, with regard to this project. The real expertise, the real burden on the certifications comes from the representatives of my other panelists here.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Newsom, and that's excellent. We're glad to see the airlines at the table, of course, in this discussion. Next question is to Mr. Arians. You are not just speaking for the National Corn Growers Association on this panel. You're a corn grower yourself, sitting right at the intersection of agriculture and aviation. So I want to ask you something with two levels to it. The scale story for corn is well known to this audience. The production base, the existing infrastructure, the ethanol potential freed up as a light-duty fleet electrifies. The case is strong, but very little of that potential is actually flowing into SAF today. And most of the people who are ultimately make it is real farmers who haven't yet seen a clear reason to engage. So the question is, first, at the system level, what does it actually take for that scale story to get unlocked and start flowing into aviation? And secondly, at the farm level, what's the signal a corn grower needs to see before they'll lean in and treat SAF as a real market worth changing practice for?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, and to the Sustainable Aviation Futures team for hosting this morning and the group on the call and their partnership over the last 6 months or so as we've worked through this project. And Matthew, you kind of set it up well of thinking through the scalability and just some of the opportunities that exist for us. Specifically for U.S. agriculture, we know that both ethanol and biodiesel are readily scaling. The costs go down, and as Mr. Newsom referenced, we certainly want cost affordability to be at play so that we all can benefit from what the SAF future, frankly, can be for the world. So part of that is understanding that row crops are vitally important to helping this product take off. As we certainly love some good plain puns in this space, there's an opportunity to leverage the infrastructure that exists for row crop or agricultural feedstocks. And certainly we recognize that the global SAF market is large enough that corn and soy alone cannot fuel all of it. It is a great place to start and leverage the infrastructure, build on what we know, while other crops and technologies start to, ramp up and understand what's needed from them to really get to scale where they can be efficient and effective and cost effective as well. So that's part of where I think we as an industry can come together and think about how do we not let perfection be the enemy of success in knowing that we need to reach goals, and we have an opportunity to leverage readily available feedstocks to do that today to get us down the road for the future. What does the second part of that question, Matthew, of thinking about what does it take to unlock a farmer's desire to change? There's a couple things there that I would say. First and foremost, there's already a lot of feedstock that qualifies based off of the practices that exist today, specifically with no-till and cover crops and enhanced efficiency fertilizers. And part of that is, as we've been working with RSB and others, is helping them understand where we're at today as a U.S. agriculture industry and what are some of the requirements that we already must comply with as part of our USDA, our United States Department of Agriculture, rules and regulations that already kind of put some barriers or guardrails around what we can and cannot do on the farm. For instance, we can't tear up wetlands, we can't tear out forest without declaring that to USDA as part of federal programs. We have clean air and clean water rules here. So those are all things that do trickle down to the farm and what we must comply with. So at the end of the day, there are already a number of feedstocks that comply. Secondly, to get movement of new adoption, it simply takes a demand signal no different than what the airlines are working for of saying, hey, we have customers that want sustainable aviation fuel in their flights. And no different that when we get a signal from an airline or a partner or an ethanol plant that says we will pay you a premium to adopt or change a practice, that's part of this demand signal that starts to change how a farmer will engage and what practices they'll adopt. So, not to oversimplify it, but that's also why I think regulation and policy are important in driving this forward to help some of those cost barriers in the infancy of this program project really understand how do we make it scale and just take maybe some of the edge off so all of us can change together so we see success.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arians. And, I represent pilots and not corn, of course, but it's absolutely it's impressive to look at the corn industry in the United States and the ethanol industry. And I encourage everyone to look at the infrastructure, look at the fundamentals, and compare how productive corn is for producing ethanol compared to other crops. And when you look at the bottom line of what potential is there, some obvious solutions start to stand out. So I'm definitely rooting for the corn industry in this sense, in ethanol. Thank you, Arians. Moving on to the next question that we have for Ms. Berggren. You sit at a really useful intersection for this conversation. You spent years at the NCGA, as I understand, before joining GIVO. You've worked on the Hill, and now you're a producer building one of the largest scale alcohol to jet plants in the US. From that vantage point, you probably see some friction points in the system that aren't obvious from the outside. So my question is, could you walk us through one friction point that's a bigger barrier than people realize, and what it would take to ease it?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, and thank you really also to RSB and to the value chain partners that have really been working on this project. We're at GIVO. I think like you, Matthew, we're very kind of heavily optimistic about the opportunities in ethanol to jet or the alcohol to jet space, leveraging those agriculture feedstocks. So certainly see this project as an important way to help advance that. I think as GIVO is investing in this production, as we know, there are a lot of links in that process, not just the investment in facilities, but then whether that's contracts with customers, whether that's supply of feedstock, but a really big bridge, as we've said, bringing all of those pieces together are these certification processes, and really looking at how we put that bridge in place, so that we can supply those customers. So. I think for GIVO certainly is really the ability to scale a certification process very efficiently and very effectively. Maybe just for example, currently in our low carbon ethanol production, we source feedstock from more than 200 farmers. So, and as we look to convert and expand that facility to SAF production, and that's just one production facility. So how do we really kind of scale, how would we scale this type of certification across a large number of feedstock suppliers across a very wide area? So I think that's certainly that scalability is an issue that we look at. We also have a lot of experience, though, I think, partnering with farmers through various growers programs that we have engaged in over the years. So I think how do we, really bringing that experience that we have had with farmers to bear. We really believe in, right, we want to be able to reward farmers for the beneficial practices that they are doing, really meeting farmers where they are today, so that we are able to, source those really efficiently produce feedstocks, those most sustainable feedstocks, and again, reward farmers for what they are doing. We've really invested in that through our Verity platform that really was built out of a recognition that for that need for reporting, for verification, for traceability, really from the farm field all the way to that airline seat. So I think hopefully, bringing some of that experience, to this process, so that we can, help make this certification process more scalable, for fuel producers, for farmers. We have piloted RSB certification with some farmers previously, and I think what we learned from that process is how can we take a very risk-based approach? How do we make sure we're considering the regulations, the requirements that apply across the U.S. Landscape? I think Sean Arians mentioned, some of those things that apply on the farm level. I think there's also a level of things that sort of apply across industry in the U.S. and make, whether those are labor, safety, other standards and regulations. So I think making sure that those types of things are considered, as well as, as really looking at how to make this work better for you, this process work well for U.S. producers. And maybe just one other thing, kind of, I know I didn't quite zero in on one thing. It was a little hard to do that. But, really, I think important for us, given our, with our experience working with farmers, is also, how do we continue to deliver on having that trust and that buy-in with the feedstock producers, with the farmers that we're sourcing from? So I think that's also another important consideration for Gevo in this process. So, I think really looking at how we use the tools and the technology that we have available today to track and to verify a lot of these points, so those that can be incorporated, and then really taking a risk-based approach so that we're able to scale this certification across a large number of growers, across a large number of acres.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Berggren, from the producer standpoint. We've had a question pop up from one of our audience members, Sean Newsom. Mr. Newsom, this is for you. When it comes to tracking SAF value from feedstock all the way to the airline customer, what internal challenges do airlines run into? Specifically, where are the technical gaps in legacy fuel management systems, and how much friction comes from SAF purchase costs being disconnected from the revenue systems meant to recover them?
This is a great question. There's a few things bundled in here that are friction in the current system, and recognizing that SAF is still relatively new, both in terms of its production and its use across the airlines, and in terms of how airlines and producers have to comply with various regulations, including the sustainability certifications. One of the things that has come up over the last few years is the concept of dual claims, not double claiming, but dual claims. So the reality that a fuel producer has a claim to make within their own constructs for the production of the SAF. An airline has a claim to make for the use of the SAF. And then an airline's customers have claims to make for the use of the SAF on the flights that they use, or the packages they send on airplanes. And providing the documentation that affirms the sustainability credentials of the SAF is complicated, because you want to ensure that there is no double claiming, that you don't have two airlines claiming the same fuel volume, that you don't have two different producers claiming the fuel volume, but that seems less likely. And so there's been the process by which that sustainability documentation, what's known as proof of sustainability or proof of compliance documentation, POS, POC, or other formats, it's still a work in progress, both in terms of recognizing how that information gets shared across the different claimants in different registries, and then also how that information gets transmitted between different stakeholders. And so there isn't as much of an issue within an airline system, so there may be issues there. The issues we're facing today are the interfaces between the different bodies that are operating in the SAF value chain. So between an airline and a SAF producer, between an airline and a SAF producer and a registry, between an airline and an end user, end customer, and how that information gets transmitted, because it's not necessarily all coming in the same format. It's not an IT system, smooth IT system interface at this point in time, but we would like to see that develop over time. It's a bit of a whatever system we're operating, whatever jurisdiction we're operating in, having its own requirements. It is complicated. There is friction in how that information is shared and transmitted across the value chain.
Thank you so much for answering that, Mr. Newsom. Moving on let's head back to Ms. Arlano. The next question's for you. This is in many ways the code we're trying to crack. RSB runs a family of sustainability certification standards that SAF buyers care about, including the CORSIA variant for international aviation, plus others used in various compliance regimes and voluntary markets. The US has enormous feedstock capacity, corn, soy, agricultural residue, and demand for certified US SAF is rising sharply across all those channels. From a certification standpoint, the bridge between US agriculture and certified SAF, particularly in Europe, is where a lot of this work sits. The question is, what will it take for US grown bushels to clear the certification hurdle, whether for CORSIA, other compliance regimes, or voluntary buyers? And where are the gaps that still need to be closed?
Yeah, thank you. Talking about the project that we presented earlier and that we are discussing about, it's important to mention that the focus of the analysis that we did when we were trying to streamline the certification indicators for the RSV and CORSIA was looking into synergies. So looking into how can we use the data that is already being produced by the farmers as a way of demonstrating compliance with the RSV certification and RSV CORSIA certification, rather than trying to find gaps. So of course, we identified a series of gaps that would need to be closed in order to really utilize all the data that is already being collected and use that as basis for demonstrating compliance with RSV. But the focus was into trying to find synergies rather than doing a gap analysis. So largely the analysis was fairly optimistic, I would say. We identified that through the different schemes that are already and regulations that are being applied in the US, a lot of the certification requirements in the RSV and for CORSIA can already be demonstrated through that data that is already being aggregated. But we did find some areas where I suppose there will need to be further either data provided, or we will need to find a way of like bridging that gap when it comes to the verification process. So just some areas that were identified in the analysis that we did as part of this project were the area around labor and social requirements, for example, where there was not a complete match between the RSV requirements and principles and criteria and what is being covered by the US schemes and different regulations. Then around the area of stakeholder consultation, we identified that through different regulations that are applicable in the US, there's already demand for stakeholder consultation that applies, but RSV takes that a step beyond just doing a stakeholder consultation, but also looking for consensus. So potentially more effort that would need to be implemented in that front by farmers as well to bridge that gap. Then there were some discrepancies also around emission reductions, depending on which scheme you're comparing, but that would be also an area where we would have to bridge the gap. And then there was also identified a series of smaller gaps that are around private land in the US, where, according to our analysis, the level of protection that is demanded, for example, for high conservation values and areas that are high biodiversity that need to be protected. So as we call them in RSV, the no-go areas, these requirements under US regulation are different depending on whether those areas are public or whether that is private land. So potentially also some areas to bridge when it comes to the private owned land and how the biodiversity and other elements are protected within those areas. So those are just some points, but of course we identified other things, but the focus was not in looking for gaps, but rather utilizing what's already being produced by the farmers and see what data are they already aggregating and are they demonstrating compliance with, and then how can we use that to demonstrate compliance with the RSV requirements. So that was kind of like the frame of the project.
Yes, Orlando, thank you for the insights onto those gaps that we have. It's now moving on. We have another question from our audience. Anyone could chime in here, but Mr. Arians, maybe I'll send it to you initially. The question is, do you see risk for U.S. farmers and local feedstock suppliers in case of investments in high-yield energy crops are unlocked in tropical regions, where the endophyclimatic conditions are unbeatable for optimum green premium over fossil Jet A1? And you get 10 bonus points if you can explain what endophyclimatic is.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and I'll start with maybe a little bit of context by way of and I'll dumb that description down as I think about it, Matthew, of are we growing the best crops for the right region in which they're suited for? Meaning fertility, availability, all of the things that go into growing a crop by way of climate, rain, water availability, all of those are critical. And as we look at the overall trend in production, land used in production of row crop agriculture in the United States, over the last 25 years, we're seeing a declining trend in that land use. Now compare that across one of the sticking points in the whole food and fuel debate or production of agricultural products is land use change. And when we look at the land use in the United States compared to other countries, including Brazil, deforestation is a key metric that RSB and others look to for what is our competitive advantage or disadvantage when we think about that. So our goal is, how are we thinking about land suitability, as I'll refer to this question, and certainly how the U.S. is complying or leading in our ability to produce the crops we need for feedstock. So when I think about the feedstock, certainly we recognize that corn grows best in certain regions. Genetics and traits have certainly helped us broaden that reach of where corn can be grown, which creates its benefits as well as its disadvantages, thinking about we now have more corn that we need to find a place for, which is why SAF is a great place to utilize that overabundant feedstock. When we look at other crops, we know that in this space there's a lot of talk about camelina and I'm just drawing a blank on one of the other C. Covercress is another one, another crop that's an oil seed that can be used in a different type of process to get to SAF. So this is about how do we leverage, I think, the feedstock match to its respective climate and water utilization, which will help us, yes, camelina and carinata, thank you. And as well as covercress is being another one that's used, as well as canola. And we're starting to see that in areas that don't normally grow those crops, but it presents a lot of challenges. And so I think for us, it's really understanding and then for the consumer to make, what do we really want? in life. Do we want sustainable aviation fuel that has a lower carbon intensity and environmental footprint than maybe a fossil-based solution? Or do we want fossil-based solutions? And that's where the customer, I think, has to make the decisions as we think about some of this is there might be a premium that always exists on SAF. But if we don't try to scale, we will never know. And so part of this, I think, is how do we get a number of these technologies at play, recognizing geographical differences as both from the customer demand, but also the feedstock availability and suitability, and work towards what can we do to make progress.
Thanks for that excellent answer. And I always like to add, do we want a little bit of SAF with a perfect carbon intensity, or do we want a lot of SAF and accept a moderate carbon intensity, at least in the near term in this first stage? So thanks for that great answer, Mr. Arians. And I want to jump to a question from an audience member. Ms. Berggren, I'll send this towards you. The question is, and I think this is a popular question, does book and claim help or hinder SAF production?
Um, yeah, I think broadly speaking, really having optionality, having flexibility, which book and claim can help enable is helpful. It doesn't mean it's, there's not necessarily have to be a one size fits all here. So yes, I think we would sort of view that optionality, that flexibility can help facilitate the market, can help facilitate that value of SAF for different customers. Our customers are they looking for simply the physical fuel? Are they looking for the environmental attributes? Are they looking for those attributes for themselves or for their customers? So I think having that optionality and those flexibilities in the system helps grow that market, helps expand that scalability, that availability to meet those different needs and motivations across customers, for airlines, and then also, the customers of airlines. So I think that really, I mean, that's how we've approached that in the marketplace. And so, certainly I don't know if others, if Sean Newsom has any thoughts on that, but I think we see a lot of positives. But certainly integrity is important, and confidence in those systems remains very important. And I think those are things that, committed to ensuring that integrity and that confidence as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Kathy, and I'd just add that, because of the cost of SAF, and I really appreciate Sean Arian's remarks about, you don't know where you can get to on that cost curve until you try. And so, but where we stand right now on that cost stack up, that there is a very substantial SAF premium after all the incentives in the US are accounted for. There's still a very substantial SAF premium remaining that the airline and their customers are sharing. And book and claim is the accounting mechanism by which the customer can be allocated the emissions reductions, and from which they can then justify their contribution, their investment in the SAF that makes the transaction happen. So in the US with the voluntary market, most of the SAF volumes come with corporate and airline working together to bring that SAF home. So it's really an essential component, and having robust book and claim accounting systems and registries are how we provide the environmental integrity so that both airlines and their customers can have the assurance to their stakeholders that they're getting what they paid for.
Yeah, and maybe real quick, just to simplify that even further, the book and claim, as we think about it, certainly enables this to take off. When we think about trying to ship fuel, and I know at one of the SAF Houston events, this was brought up from one of the airlines too. If our goal is to reduce our carbon footprint and impact, yet we want to ship fuel because we require mass balance, and we need to ship that fuel all the way to Alaska. So a particular airline there could use it. We kind of defeat the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish in reducing our carbon and environmental impact. So I do think the book and claim with proper safeguards and requirements that Mr. Newsom talks about that I think we're all aligned on of we want to maintain the integrity and it really just helps us ensure that we are reaching the goal rather than thinking we are and still creating more carbon because of additional transportation that may or may not be required to help us get the ball down the field on this one.
And then if I could just sort of add one last thing, and that's in tying it back to the project we're talking about. Many of the corporate customers require third-party sustainability certifications. And so in effect, what we're trying to do is with this project is better enable that entire closed loop of stakeholders.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Berggren. Thank you, Arians, Mr. Newsom, for that question. We have another question from the audience, which I think is good. As the SAF industry scales, do you believe the United States is underestimating the structural limitations of feedstock availability? And if so, which feedstock constraints pose the greatest long-term risk to commercial scalability? I haven't directed that to anyone yet, but is there someone who would like to chime in on that?
I'll
I can
start
maybe,
just
yeah,
okay.
go for it.
Okay, I'll start just from an overall industry standpoint. We're very clear-eyed about the feedstock issue. We don't think there'll be any one feedstock that's going to deliver our long-term ambitions as an aviation industry. But we don't want to disregard any one of the individual potential feedstocks. And we want to take advantage of those that are available now, and utilize those to their best capability. But we're not counting on utilizing any one feedstock for all of the airline's requirements over the long term. It's a very much an all of the above approach. And there have been many studies that have been conducted on feedstock availability over the short, medium, and long term, including one in the United States by the Department of Energy known as the Billion Ton Study. And I invite people that are interested in that question to explore that study. There's a great database and report on that available online.
Yeah, that is indeed a great report. And the title says it itself, 1 billion tons of biomass available per year sustainably. So it's an excellent report indeed. And Ms. Harlano, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just echoing what Sean just mentioned. I mean, we know that the current stuff that is being produced largely depends on UCO and used cooking oil, and this project, as well as everything that we do, is looking into how can we diversify the feedstock sourcing so that we can really ensure scalability and sustainability in the future. So as Sean mentioned, we don't want to rule out any one particular type of feedstock. We want to make sure that the sourcing is sustainable and socially responsible and that there's traceability throughout the supply chain. But the whole concept of sustainability in the scaling of the sector also relies on starting getting creative and looking beyond UCO. So that's why this project is also really important.
I would just say, yeah, I think scaling alcohol to jet production is a great example of diversifying that feedstock and moving into additional feedstocks. There will be more feedstocks, there are opportunities as well. But I think really looking at a feedstock and supply chain that is very well developed, that is very, very abundant, very sustainable. And so certainly the opportunity, you don't want to pass by that opportunity, to leverage that feedstock and that supply chain for SAF. So, I think it's, the U.S. certainly can be a leader there. But I think and also a feedstock that really lends itself to very low emission fuels, to net zero emission fuels. For those opportunities, whether it's, sequestering additional carbon through that production process. So, again, like I think as everyone has said, there can't just be one feedstock and focus on one thing. But I think we also want to make sure that as we continue to develop new opportunities, that we're not bypassing those opportunities and the value chain that is very accessible to us right now.
Thank you, Ms. Berggren. The next question we have from our audience is, and I'll direct this one to Mr. Arians. How do corporate buyers assess the value of agriculture waste-based SAF related to SAF produced from other feedstock pathways?
Yeah, and I will take this from the farmer perspective rather than the corporate buyer perspective. And part of the work that we spend a lot of time doing in partnership with groups like RSB and others is understanding what the life cycle assessment is and analysis for our respective crop. And as we often hear the term waste feedstocks, I want to be very clear that there is very little waste in the agriculture system. That part of the reason why I no-till and why I grow cover crops on my farm is because those break down as organic matter and provide nutrients that they took up throughout the growing season and provide fertilizer and those nutrients back into the soil profile to help improve organic matter and nutrient availability for the next crop. So when we talk about corn stover and we get a ton of requests on corn stover because it's considered a waste, and there is certainly, as we think about, there's a component of it that could be removed from the field while not maybe putting a negative to the fertilizer penalty for the next crop, but there is an attribute that needs to be applied. So when a corporate buyer is thinking about this, and we look at all of the components of when the corn kernel goes through ethanol and makes ethanol and corn oil and DDGs that are fed to livestock, the corn stover has a component. So as we think about that, it is not a waste product. It has a penalty that a farmer pays. So when someone comes to us and says, "Well, there's no penalty," there absolutely is. And when we also compare to other crops like Carinata, Camelina, that are intermediary crops that are grown throughout the year, this is also a big thing that we work on is that part of the reason from a Brazilian standpoint that some of their carbon intensity scores look so good is because in their life cycle, they take it on one crop. They take the land use change penalty on one crop. If we're growing multiple crops in a year, that land use change penalty needs to be assessed throughout the value chain of all the crops grown on that land. So when we think about Carinata, Camelina, canola, whatever other crop you want to put on it, because part of our requirements in the US is that if we grow a cover crop, we cannot harvest it because it's part of this nutrient cycling for conservation practices. So if all of a sudden we're harvesting another crop, that life cycle needs to be taken into effect. So as we think about corporate accounting and broad life cycle models, those things need to get aligned as we think about gaps that certification standards can help us close. Those are certainly things that are important to us as we think about feedstock to feedstock. How do they all match up to make the best product? And as we talked about the land use piece of climate, those are all vital parts that questions we've got to answer as we think about how do we get SAF to be successful for all members of the value chain. Certainly, I speak for corn today, but it's important that we know it's going to take multiple crops, like Mr. Newsom mentioned, and that's part of just how can we leverage what we know today to advance the movement on this for everybody's benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Arians. So that wraps it up for time. I want to thank everyone, especially Roz from Sustainable Aviation Future. She's our master organizer in this industry. I don't know how she does it, but thank you, Roz, and Ms. Arlano, Mr. Arians, Ms. Bergen, and Mr. Newsom. It was really a power panel, and I learned a lot myself. I enjoyed this. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. If there's one thing I hope this hour has made clear, it's that the resources are there in the US. the U.S. Department of Energy report, the billion-ton report that Sean Newsom mentioned. Take a look at it. It's named for what it's found, confirms that the United States can sustainably provide more than 1 billion tons of biomass every year. The fundamentals behind SAF aren't theoretical. The feedstock is real and the potential is real. And I think a wider realization is landing this industry that SAF isn't just a clean energy story, it's a more energy story. The world is waking up to the fact that we don't only want clean energy, we need a lot of it, full stop. So for security and prosperity, SAP delivers both at the same time, and that's what changes which doors open, which is exactly why this conversation matters. Panels like this are how the pathways get built, how information moves, and how the gaps get understood, and how we go from potential to real industry producing more energy and more prosperity. Thank you again for joining. I'll hand it over to Roz. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful summary. So I don't have an awful lot to add, but I do just want to echo Matthew's thanks to the whole panel, including you, Matthew, and to all of our audience as well. If anybody would like to learn more about everything that's been discussed today, please do join us in Houston from November 4th to 6th for the SAF North America Congress, and go to www.sustainableaviationfutures.com for full details of all of our events. But with that, I will end the webinar and thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.